Hey guys, here's the much awaited chapters 15 and 16 of Son of the Beaver. On the day of their greatest adventure, Atian had come without his dog, so there was no warning. Matt was in fine spirits that day because he had managed, by magnificent stroke of luck, to hit a rabbit with his bow and arrow. It was the first time that this had happened, and it was more the rabbit's doing than his own. The silly creature just sat there and let him take careful aim. All the same, he was pleased with himself, and even more pleased that Atian was there to see it. When the boys decided to visit the beaver dam again, Matt was unwilling to leave the rabbit behind in case some thieving animal should discover it. He was walking behind Atian, swinging the rabbit carelessly by the ears as Atian always did. When the Indian suddenly halted, his whole body tensed. Matt could see nothing unusual, and he had opened his mouth to speak when Atian silenced him with a jerk of a hand. Then he heard a sound in the underbrush ahead. Not a rustle like a grouse or a snake, not a trapped animal. This was a stirring of something moving slowly and heavily. He felt a cold prickle in his stomach. He stood beside Atian, his own muscles tight, scarcely breathing. A low bush bent sideways. Through the leaves a brown head thrust itself. Bigger than that of a dog, and shaggier. It was a small bear cub. Matt could see the little eyes peering at them curiously, the brown nose wrinkling at the strange smell of human boy. The little animal looked so comical that Matt almost laughed out loud. "St!" Matt warned under his breath. There was a crashing of bush and a low, snarling growl. An immense paw reached through the thicket and tumbled the cub over and out of sight. In its place loomed a huge brown shape. Bursting through the leaves was a head 3 times as big as the cub. No curiosity in those small eyes, only an angry reddish gleam. Somehow Matt had the sense not to run. He stood frozen on the path. A bear could overtake a running man in a few bounds, and this one was only 2 bounds away. The bear's head moved slowly from side to side. Its heavy body brushed aside the branches as though they were cobwebs. It swayed, shifting its weight from one foot to the other. Slowly it rose on its hind legs, and Matt could see the wicked, curving claws. Matt would never know why he acted as he did. He could not remember thinking at all, only staring with numb horror at the creature about to charge. Somehow he did move. He swung that dead rabbit by its ears and hurled it straight at the bear's head. The tiny body struck the bear squarely on its nose. With a jerk of her head, the bear shook it off as though it was a buzzing mosquito. The rabbit flopped useless to the ground. The bear did not even bother to look down at it. She had been distracted for only an instant, but in that instant something flashed through the air. It was a sharp twang and the dull thud of a blow. Just between the eyes of the bear, the shaft of Atien's arrow quivered. As the waving forepaws began to lower, a second arrow struck just below the bear's shoulder. The great head shuddered and sank toward the ground. With a wild yell, Atian sprang forward and thrust his knife deep just behind the first arrow. Still scarcely aware that he moved at all, Matt leaped after him, jerking his own knife from his belt, and he sank it into the brown fur. His blow had been misplaced, but it was not needed. The bear's sides were heaving. The boys stood watching, and in a few moments it lay still. Matt stared down at the creature in horror. The fearsome yellow teeth were still bared in a snarl. Saliva and blood dribbled down from the open jaws. The little eyes that had glittered so savagely were filmed over. The long, sharp claws hung powerless, clotted with pawed-up dirt. Now there was nothing to fear. Matt felt his knees shaking. He hoped that Atian would not notice, and he managed a wide grin to hide his trembling. But Atian did not grin back. He stood over the bear and began to speak, slowly and solemnly in his own tongue, and he spoke for some time. What were you saying? Matt demanded when the speaking was over. I tell bear I do not want to kill, Matt, Atian answered. Indian not kill she bear with cub. I tell bear we did not come here to hunt. But it might have killed us both. Maybe. I ask bear to forgive that I must kill. Well, I'm mighty thankful you did, Matt said stoutly, and he was about to say that he had never been so scared in his entire life, but he thought better of it. Atian looked at him, and his solemnness suddenly dissolved in a grin. You move quick, he said, like Indian. Matt felt his cheeks turn red. You killed him, he said honestly, yet he knew that he had had a part. He had given Atian just the instant in which to notch his arrow. Atian nudged the bear with his toe. Small, he said, just some fat. Good for eat. Small? That monstrous creature? It certainly was too big for two boys to carry. It appeared to Atian that he had no intention of trying. Belong squaw now, he said. I go tell. You mean a squaw is going to carry that heavy thing? Cut up meat, then carry. Squaw work, Atian answered. It was plain that he had done the man's work and was finished with it. The cub, Matt remembered now. It was nowhere in sight. Atian shook his head. Let cub go, he said. When Sigwon come again. Him plenty big to eat. Take rabbit, Atian reminded him. Matt looked with distaste at the rabbit, almost covered by the bear's heavy paw, the fur matted and bloody. He would rather not have touched it, but obediently he pulled it out. It was his dinner, after all, and he knew that in Atian's world, everything that was killed must be used. The Indians did not kill for sport. When Atian had disappeared into the forest, Matt stood still, looking down at the first bear he had ever seen. He felt resentful. Atian had killed the bear, of course. It was his by right, but Matt would have just liked a small share of that meat, even one of those big claws to show his father. Then he remembered the boy's tribute. He had moved fast like an Indian. That would have to be his share enough. Chapter 16. In the late afternoon, Matt sat in the cabin doorway. He couldn't think of any work to do. He felt restless, the excitement still jumping about inside him. He needed to talk to someone. He wanted to tell his father about the bear. Thinking of his father, he felt a snake of worry crawling about behind every other thought. The worry was becoming more frequent every day. What could have kept his father so long? Suppose some accident had befallen him. The meeting with the bear had shaken Matt's trust in the forest. Now it seemed to close in on him from every side, dark and threatening. Suppose his father had met with a bear. Suppose he never got back to Quincy. How would his mother know where to find this place? Or even where to send anyone to look for him? Matt hugged his arms around his chest, but the cold was inside. It would not go away. Something moved at the edge of the woods. Matt leapt to his feet. A stranger came walking into the clearing. With an ugly chill against his backbone, Matt stared at the hideously painted face. Then he recognized Atian, a very different Atian from the boy who had walked with him in the forest that morning. The Indian boy had washed his body, and it shone with fresh grease. He had combed his tangled black locks. Down his cheek on either side and on his forehead ran broad streaks of blue and white paint. On a cord around his neck dangled a row of new bear claws. In case Atian had noticed his first alarm, Matt greeted him boldly. What's the war paint for? He added. Not war paint, Atian answered. Squaw make feast with bear. My grandfather say you come. Matt hesitated, unable to believe his ears. It took him a moment to realize that this was actually an invitation. Thanks, he stammered. I'd sure like some of that bear meat. Wait till I get my jacket. Shut door, Atian reminded him. Maybe another bear come. Atian was in good humor. He had made one of his unexpected jokes. Long way, Atian said after a time. Matt was certain they must have been walking fast for more than an hour. He remembered that Atian had already walked this way to fetch him and kept silent. It was so dark now that he could barely see to put one foot in front of the other, but he realized that they were on a well-beaten trail. Just as the last light was glinting from above the treetops, they reached a river bank. Drawn up at its edge was a small birch canoe. Atian motioned to him to step into it. Then he gave a push and leaped nimbly into the stern. His paddle moved soundlessly. Grateful to sit still, Matt was entranced by the speed, the silence, the gliding shadows on the silent river. He was regretful when in a few strokes they had reached the other side. Now Matt could see a glimmer of light deep in the forest. Atian had led him toward it, and presently their way was barred by a solid wall of upright posts, a stockade. For the first time a quiver of uneasiness made Matt falter. But stronger than any doubt, curiosity drove him on. Not for one moment would he have turned back. Eagerly he followed Atian through a gateway to an open space filled with smoke and moving shadows and wavering patches of light cast by birch-bark torches. All around him in a circle rose the dim shapes of cabins and cone-shaped wigwams. In the center of a circle, a long, narrow fire was burning between walls of logs. Suspended on timbers hung 3 iron pots, sending up rosy curls of steam in the smoky air. The fragrance of boiling meat and pungent herbs made Matt's stomach crawl. Then he was aware of the Indians. They sat silently on either side of the fire, their painted faces ghastly in the flickering light. They were clad in an odd medley of garments, some in Englishman coats and jackets, while others with bright blankets draping their shoulders. A few had feathers standing straight up from headbands. Everywhere there was a gleam of metal on arms and chests. Women in bright cloth skirts and odd pointed caps moved about without a sound, adding wood to the fire or stirring the contents of the kettle. Light glinted on the silver armbands and necklaces. Clearly the Indians had put on their finest array for this feast. It came over Matt with a rush of shame how shabby he must look in their eyes. Even if Atian had warned him, what could he have done? He had no other clothes to wear. Probably Atian had known and had said nothing. No one seemed to notice him, yet he was conscious of unblinking stare of the row facing him. The others did not turn their heads. They seemed to be waiting. In the silence, Matt's heart beat so loudly they surely must all have heard it. After a long pause, one man slowly rose and came toward him. It was Saknus, his paint-streaked face barely recognizable. He wore a long red coat decorated by a handsome beaded collar and metal armbands. A crown of feathers rose from a beaded band around his forehead. He stood very tall, and there was pride in his stern features. Why, Matt thought, he looked like a king. "Kuwe," Saknus said with dignity. "White boy welcome." In a sudden, terrifying yell, the rows of Indians echoed this greeting. "Taho," they shouted. "Taho ye bye-bye." "Kuwe," Matt stammered in return, and then more boldly, "Kuwe." The Indians seemed satisfied. Smiles flashed in their dark eyes. It was a rough laughter, and then, seeming to forget him, they began to jabber to each other. From nowhere, children suddenly crowded around him, giggling and daring each other to touch him. Matt's heart slowed its pounding. There was nothing to fear in this place, but after the weeks of stillness in the cabin, the noise was confusing. He was grateful when Atian came to his rescue and led him to a seat at the end of a log. An old woman approached and held out to him a gourd cup. It contained a Swedish drink, acid and flavored with maple sugar. Good on his dry tongue. Saknus raised his arm, and instantly the clamor was silenced. There was no doubt Atian's grandfather was the leader here. An Indian brought him a long pipe, and Saknus put it to his lips and slowly blew out a long wreath of smoke. The rows of Indians waited respectfully for him to speak. Instead, the old man turned to his grandson and held out the pipe. Atian stepped to the center of the clearing. In the firelight he stood straight and slender, his bare arms and legs gleaming. Matt had never seen him like this. Proudly he took the pipe, set it briefly to his own lips, and handed it back to his grandfather. Then he began to speak. Matt did not need to understand the words. He soon realized that Atian was recounting the morning's adventure. Watching his gestures, Matt felt himself living again. The walk through the woods, the meeting with the small cub, the fearsome mother about to charge. As Atian spoke, the Indian urged the boy on with grunt and shouts of approval and pleasure. Atian tensed his body and uttered a sharp cry, pointed at Matt, and made a flinging sweep of his arm, hurling an imaginary rabbit. The seated figures broke into loud cries, shouting, "Hey!" grinning and pointed to Matt, swinging their own arms in imitation. Matt's cheeks were hot. He knew they were making fun of him. But boisterous as it was, the sound was friendly. Now they turned back to Atian and followed his story with growing excitement. Atian certainly made a very good story of it. His telling took a lot longer than the actual event. Plainly, they all enjoyed it, and in listening, they were all taking part in it. Atian was a skillful storyteller. Matt could understand now just how he must have delighted them with his acting out of Robinson Crusoe. When the narrative was over, the Indians sprang to their feet. They formed a long line, then began a sound that sent a tingle, half dread and half pleasure, down Matt's spine. A lone Indian leaped into the head of the line, beating a rattle against his palm in an odd, stirring rhythm. He strutted and pranced in ridiculous contortions for all the world, like a clown in a village fair. The line of figures followed after him, aping him and stamping their feet in response. Atian was at his side again. "Dance now," he said, "then feast." The rhythm of the rattle quickened. The line of figures wove around the fire faster and faster. Women joined now at the end of the line, linking their arms, swaying. Finally, the children, even small children, were dancing, stamping their small naked feet. "Dance," Atian commanded. He seized Matt's arm and pulled him into the moving line. The men near him cheered him on, laughing at Matt's stumbling attempts. Once he caught his breath, Matt found it a simple step to follow. His confidence swelled as the rhythm throbbed through his body, loosening his tight muscles. He was suddenly filled with excitement and happiness. His own heels pounded against the hard ground. He was one of them. He came back to the earth with a stitch in his side. His legs threatened to give way under him. The dancing seemed to have no end. Determined that Atian should not see him weakening, he moved faster and stamped harder. Finally, when he felt he could not make the circle one more time, the dance ended. The feasting began. A squaw brought him a wooden bowl filled with thick hot stew and a curiously carved wooden spoon. At first, the steaming mouthful burnt his tongue, but he was too hungry to wait. He thought nothing had ever tasted so good, dark and greasy and spicy, so this was bear meat. Presently he noticed that Atian sat beside him eating nothing. "You're not eating," he said with sudden doubt. "Have you given me your share?" "This is my bear," the boy answered. "I kill, not eat. Maybe not get any more bear." He didn't sound as if he minded in the least, as if in fact he was proud of not eating. When Matt's bowl was empty, the squaw refilled it. By the time he finished, sleepiness began to drag at his eyelids. He could scarcely hold them open. Atian seemed in no hurry to leave. The Indians were enjoying themselves, refilling their bowls, shouting at each other, laughing and slapping their legs at what seemed to be uproarious jokes. This was noisier than any celebration Matt had ever seen in Quincy, even on muster day. Why had he even had the thought that Indians were a dull lot? At last, however, they fell silent, and Matt saw that one of them was beginning another story. It promised to be a long one. Between the sentences, the speaker drew on his pipe, and the smoke curled from his nose and mouth as he spoke. Matt's head drooped and came up with a painful jerk. He had almost fallen asleep sitting up. Atian laughed and motioned him to his feet. At the thought of tramping all the way back to the cabin, Matt groaned. It must be close to midnight. Then he saw that Atian did not need to go back. He led Matt toward one of the wigwams and pulled back the flap of deerskin that hung across the door. Inside, a small fire burned, and by its faint light, Matt saw a low platform covered with matting and fur. Atian made a silent motion, and Matt, too sleepy to question, gratefully let his tired body sink down on the soft skins. Atian stirred up the fire and left him alone. Once, long after, Matt roused to hear the rattle and the pounding feet. The Indians were dancing again, and he was thankful to stay right where he was. And that was chapters 15 and 16 of The Son of the Beaver.